welcome to the very first episode of 2023. I am your host, Amy Herman, and this is School Librarians United podcast. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter. My handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. And now in a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. Today I want to make sure I tell you all about this brand new series being released in 2023, and that is Sports Illustrated Kids, Sports Greatest Myths and Legends by Elliott Smith. And there are 4 books in this series, and I'll tell you right now, the reason why I like this so much is because I know precious little about sports. And when I purchase books for my sections, I want to make sure that they get the most sort of the broadest appeal possible. And as you know, especially if you're on a sort of limited budget, like so many of us are, it's hard to buy books which are team specific or specific to a certain sort of athlete, because if you think about it, oftentimes our students' allegiances are rather fleeting, or teams come in and out of popularity. And that's where these books are so much fun, because they focus on the sport rather than identify solely on a specific team or a sports personality. In this case, we've got 4 books. Each of them are 32 pages long. These are informational texts, and the interest level is grades 4th grade to 6th grade, with a reading level that is around 3rd grade. And I'll tell you what, these are fun. You've got baseball, basketball, football, and hockey. And so the fun thing is you can sort of build up your collection without purchasing books that might lose interest when the teams don't do as well, or say a particular athlete has fallen out of favor with our students. And reading the description from the website, did Babe Ruth really call his shot? Was Super Bowl III fixed? Was Michael Jordan really cut from his high school team? In Sports Greatest Myths and Legends, readers can dig deeper and uncover the truth behind some of the greatest myths in sports history. Read all about the players, plays, and events that became the stuff of legends in this intriguing new series from Sports Illustrated Kids. And friends, you can just imagine some of your little sports fans reading these books and then going home and sharing the, hey, did you know? Or, hey, can you believe? I mean, that's what kids do, right? They grab onto those nuggets of information, and then it becomes currency and conversation topics at the dinner table. Hey, did you know I read this book? And blah, 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 blah. And it's really fun because it empowers kids with information, and it gives them pause because it calls into question things that people believe. And all of a sudden, it empowers our students to then impart that information on a listener, and then to engage in conversation, and they get to talk about the sport that they love. I think these books are really going to do well in any collection where you've got some sports fans who are looking to learn more about the sports they love. Friends, I am so grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering School Librarians United listeners a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Elementary Genrefication, and my conversation with Shelley Kappeler. Shelley Kappeler, welcome to the podcast.
I am so happy to be here, Amy. I am a longtime listener and I take notes every episode, and so I'm so happy to join in and talk about our topic today.
Well, thank you so much. Shelley, give us an understanding of where you are in the world. Tell us a little bit about your everyday. And friends, Happy New Year, by the way. Shelley and I are recording in the last days of 2022, but by the time you listen to this, it'll be 2023. So, Shelley, when you get back to school, tell us what a typical day looks like, where you are, and what's your job like?
Well, I'm at an elementary school in St. Pete, Florida. I'm a Title I school, and we have a very diverse population. We have about 540 students, and I always like to tell people what my library budget is when they listen, and that's $2,600 for 540 students. So I am the librarian, and I am also the technology coordinator, and we are a one-to-one school, so I manage over 500 devices. We also have a makerspace in our school, and I am also the after-school STEM coordinator, and I coordinate the school website and our school Facebook page. And then... I know that's a lot, isn't it?
It sounds like there's more.
There is more. So I'm sure you can tell by that I am on a flex schedule. And then in my spare time, I also help other schools as one of the district catalogers. And I serve as a Lego ambassador for Lego education. And I'm an NC WIT partner, which we could talk about later. And then I'm a FIRST robotics mentor.
Wow. And I will say there are a lot of people right now who are super jealous that you are flexible and elementary at the same time. Those two oftentimes do not go hand in hand. And as somebody who for 14 years taught a fixed schedule elementary, I think so much of my job would have been different had it been flexible. So I think that's amazing because it sounds like you've been able to weave in all of these other interests and skills and different, all those different hats you wear that so many of us have found ourselves in similar circumstances. But I appreciate that you share your budget for the reason because it does put into context so much about the challenges that you have in building your collection to start with. And because the topic of today, elementary genrefication, is so relevant to the collection that you've been able to build. Can I get a sense of how large your collection is, both fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah, so I love it when people come on and you always wonder either how many students they're serving, how big their collection is, and how much money they have to do all that with. So yes, that is my budget. It's $2,600 that we get from the district, and then anything else I have to get myself. I will tell you that I do not do a book fair also. I don't do it for equity reasons, and so there is no book fair in my library. And my collection, to begin with, before I genrefied or weeded, was 13,000 books.
Wow.
And now it's about 4,500.
But isn't it fair to say that of those you said 13,000 books, how many of those were regularly getting checked out? I think your circ stats would definitely support the decision that you made to thin the herd, so to speak.
Right. And we could talk about this. This would be another episode. There's a difference between circulation and reading. Circulation is books that come in and books that go out. And that's all that number is. That is not the number of books that are being read. Those are simply the books being checked in and the books being checked out. And that's a different number or a statistic than the books students are reading.
Can I ask, do you have a sense? Or how do you get that sense of which books are getting checked out and also being enjoyed by the students? And I imagine some of that has to do with if you allow your students to renew books, that you get a sense I started it, but I didn't get a chance to finish it.
Yes, you can get that if you allow students to renew, and you're active in renewals, which I do some of. But one of the things I don't do is I don't do self-checkout. I check out all of the books, so I talk to every student who comes and checks out a book. Right. So I do have a greater sense of every book that every student is checking out and how long they're checking it out for and if they're really reading it, because they're usually talking to me about it.
Well, and also their friends want to check it out next because their friends have said, I want that book after they're done.
They'll stand at the counter. Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Those are the best because the books never get back on the shelf. They just, you do handing them from one kid to another, changing their name. We talk about why you can't just do this in the classroom. You have to come up and switch it out because the computer needs to know who has the book next.
Right. And I'm working actually with Destiny and Follett to have more of a statistics that track patron visits more than circulation statistics. So you track how many students are visiting the library every month and their checkouts versus just the books. I don't care the books that are visiting and going in and out. I care about the patrons that are visiting.
Wow. And, I will be honest, I don't have much of a circ stat to brag about, but I do keep track of our patron check-in and checkouts in terms of like our students coming in and our classes being assigned to our spaces. And so those are numbers I can definitely brag about because I could just pull up that Google form and indicate where and when and how often my students are coming into our space. So you're right. Kids coming to your space is a really valid way to assess the how our students are utilizing the resources that we provide, whether it's our physical space or our print collection, and some people measure their digital collections. Did you mention that you have an assistant or no?
No library aide, no assistant, no volunteers.
Wow. So, in one case, the upside to that, wouldn't you say, is that there's no one better than you to have a sense of like, you've literally got your finger on the pulse of your space because you're not, any of that responsibility hasn't been shared out with another person who might have a better sense. Cause I know when I had an assistant, which books got checked out during checkout, I actually didn't know because I was working the floor and my assistant would be behind the desk doing the actual, this is the kid who checks out this book. This is the kid who checks out this book. And I'm working more with individual students rather than every single student every single time.
I think that's true. I think for librarian teachers who either have student assistants that are in charge of the checkout and they come and that's part of a library ambassador program, that they're checking out the books while either they're conducting a class, that they do kind of lose that sense of the book checkout because they're running the class. But I'm sort of doing both of those things, and I definitely see every single student who is doing is, and you could probably like roll out 35 books on the counter, and I could probably match those to the student who has them.
That's amazing. I know your students are lucky to have you. Friends, the last time we discussed genrefication, specifically at the elementary level, the collection, it was episode 60, and my conversation with Maggie Rohde, recorded in February, if you can believe this, pre-pandemic, 2020. So 3 years ago nearly. You won't want to miss out on the amazing show notes that Shelley has put together for us. But for starters, Shelley, am I right that when we talk about genrefication, this can, but not always apply to both our nonfiction collection as well as our fiction collection? Because I know for so many of us, when we say genrefication, we think fiction.
I think that's true. I think some librarians feel that it's easier to genrefy fiction, for one thing. And some librarians feel that nonfiction is already genrefied by Dewey. And it also allows them to keep one foot in the Dewey system. And it allows them to keep teaching Dewey lessons, which they may be very invested in.
I grant you, it's true. When you look at the numbers, oftentimes it's easy to put pictures. And I know when I worked elementary, especially for our pre-readers, we'd put these bright pictures of, say, our pet section. And so we had a little cat where the cat books were and the dog for the dog books. And we'd include the number as well. And you're absolutely right. Every year that I taught elementary, I taught Dewey in so much that students understood numerically that books had assigned spaces on the shelf, similar to, say, like the address on your house. And it helped, it helped us find the books on the shelves, just like it helps, Amazon find your doorstep. So it was an easy lesson. It made sense. And I'll be honest, it never once occurred to me to not teach Dewey when I was in elementary school.
Right. And I think librarians feel if they don't teach that, they're somehow not legitimate. Like, I got my MLS and it says there's Dewey. And if I'm not teaching that, then what else am I teaching? Like, they so heavily rely on that. Like, then how on earth would I teach research or something if that's not a part of it?
Well, and I think something that we're going to talk about in this conversation is how intuitive we make our collection when we're trying to encourage access and our students' access to our collection. And genrefication sort of goes hand in hand with this concept that you want to lower those barriers to encourage more student, to give them that sort of ownership over that space, that they feel confident when they're walking through your bookshelves. So I'm excited that we're going to talk about that. There is an unavoidably wide range of age group as well as maturity level in elementary. Let's talk about this a little bit, because you can have little preschoolers. I know I've had 3 and 4 year olds in the same library where I support 11-year-olds. And with that 6 years of growth and reading levels that you have to consider, what have you done to overcome this challenge when you are looking at genrefying an elementary collection?
Well, this is where we get into, I want to talk about something called universal design. I have a background in that, and if you've not understood what that is, universal design is about providing the greatest amount of access possible to the most people in the least restrictive environment. So when we think about that as far as genrefication, we can think about that in a couple of ways. We can think about that in our physical spaces on how the space looks and how we organize it. So when you think about those age groups, the first thing I did is my library is older, and I'm not getting any new furniture anytime soon unless somebody hears this podcast episode and comes knocking. But in the meantime, my furniture is from the 1970s, and I was limited in the space. So I tried to organize it in the least restrictive method so that all of my users feel a sense of belonging to the space where they could travel along, and I wouldn't have to say, those books are not for you, even for my VPK kids and my 5th graders. So I reorganized the shelves for my kindergarten and VPK, so it's kind of a natural barrier that they sort of travel amongst the shelves that seem like that's their area without me having to put a negative connotation that says, don't go over to the fiction area.
Got it.
And even if they wander over there, because genrefication allows you not to follow the Dewey system, which inadvertently will put restrictive barriers on you because you've got to follow A, you've got to follow B, you've got to put, Diary of a Wimpy Kid where it falls in the author. Genrefication lets you put the books anywhere that you decide provide the greatest amount of access. So in my library, on the highest shelf, I have the books that are appropriate for the oldest kids. On the top shelf.
Oh, there you go. All right. No, now
Does that make sense?
Okay. Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
So Michael Vey, Amulet, Harry Potter, those books in a long series are on my top shelf on the fiction. So my VPK kids can walk over there, but it's unlikely they're going to look up and say, oh, I would like Deathly Hallows today, right? Because that shelf is tall. But on the lower shelf, there are books. There's Dogman. Fantastic. You want Dogman today? Love you. Let's check that out. Right?
Yep. So I'm curious, have you genrefied your nonfiction as well?
Yes. So I went a little rogue, which we can...
But you're allowed to, because the person who knows your students best is you. You don't have to justify or explain yourself to a co-librarian or even an assistant. Your first and only responsibility is to the students and the staff you support. And you don't owe another librarian an explanation as to what you do, because you're supporting the needs of the people you work with every day. I think that's completely understandable.
Well, when I genrefied, my sole purpose was to create greater access and for it to be student-centered. So a lot of librarians will say, but you want to make sure the collection will work for the librarian who may come in after you. Okay, my collection is not for the next librarian. It's for my students today. And you think about this, I'm going to give you an example. My mother has always said, like, don't paint your room or your house that color because it won't be good for resale, right? It won't be good for resale if you ever sell the house. Okay, well, I've now been in the house 25 years. So at some point, you've got to do things that work now for your students, right?
I guess I've never thought about it before. This is the first time I've been in a library that I wasn't sharing. So the last 7 years, I was sharing libraries with other librarians. And so we literally had to be on the same page about things like what we were purchasing. And when we worked together as a cohesive unit, when I was working in the library, say on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, somebody else was coming in as the librarian on the Thursdays or the Fridays or in the mornings versus the afternoons. And you're very acutely aware that other professionals are coming into the space and deciding, many cases differently than I would, how to treat a collection. And that explains why I've never genrefied an elementary collection, because I've always shared a collection with other librarians. And forgive me, but we didn't see eye to eye on that.
Right. And that could be. And even I've talked to my principal about this. And, that's one of the things we can talk about later, is about having your support. And I always tell her, I said, I really see my bosses, they're the 7-year-olds. I report to the minions and what their needs are, right? Like, they tell me what I need to be doing. That's who I'm paying attention to. Like, they're your customers. And so it needs to be student-centered.
Yeah. So do you formally ask them? Is it just part of your building that relationship with your students? Do you have a way for them to submit suggestions, or do you solicit them when you're talking to the students, when you see them?
Oh, absolutely. Like, they tell me all the time. They have no qualms about telling me what books we need. I keep the vendor catalogs out on the circulation desk. They'll flip through them and they'll say, listen, why don't we have any Fortnite books? I'm totally getting those next. Thank you. And we'll write those down.
But that clearly you've established that culture. Like, you have to have a librarian in that space who is not only receptive to students' solicitations, but also encourages it. And clearly you've made that you've communicated that with your students over the years.
I definitely think that, you need to create a sense of belonging where they feel the ownership to participate in the space. And so you have to make sure that they feel like they can move about the space in order to start directing how they want to use the space. And I think genrefication has done that for us. And that may not be the answer for everybody, but that was the goal for me in the space. The goal wasn't to increase circulation.
Okay, so I know listeners are going to want you to explain what you just said. What is the goal of genrefication if not to increase circulation?
Well, I can tell you, increased circulation can be a byproduct that happens as a result of it, but that shouldn't be the reason you do it. Like, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of labor, and I think there is a misconception that genrefication ends. Like, it's a project, you do it, you put some labels on it, and then it's over. But in reality, genrefication is dynamic and it's ongoing. It's a process that continues in your library as your collection changes and as your students change.
Okay, now I feel silly for asking the question. You're absolutely right. It's not a one and done.
And I think people make that mistake. Like, librarians have been genrifying now for almost a decade. And I think they originally started out as it being kind of a labeling project. Like, I've stickered the books, I've organized them, and now I'm good. But now I think the process is much more dynamic if you do it correctly.
In a sense that you would, as your collection shifts and changes, it's possible that your genres might shift and change.
Right, as your students change, right. I mean, I have some genres, and I'm very data-driven, and I do a lot of tests all the time, which we can go into, but I will create a genre and nothing will happen, or I'll see that it does not work for my students, and I'll be like, well, that's Bupkis. Like,
well, and I will say this is a great opportunity to mention that you have some great blog posts which you've written about. And if I'm not mistaken, you did one of these sort of tests to see if you could increase interest in areas. And it was something that had to do with your labeling of your ocean animals. And can you tell listeners a little bit about that? Because I think it was fascinating that you ran this test to see what kind of change this would make for your students who were looking through those parts of the library.
One of the first tests I ran when I was considering genrefying and how I would do the signage is I ran some tests on simply how the books were already on the shelves. So in one area, I did dinosaurs, and I looked in advance. Like, dinosaurs had not been checked out, but I thought kids still love dinosaurs. And in one area, I did marine life, because I thought kids really liked whales and sharks. So I labeled dinosaurs with the word dinosaurs and a picture of a dinosaur. And in one section, I did a little black and white sign on some foam board, and I wrote marine life, and I put a picture of a shark. And I didn't move any books. They were still where they are Dewey'd. And then I tracked the circulation of those books before and after, because you've got to have, like, good statistics. And then, like, the dinosaur books, I didn't even, like, re-tidy the shelf. I took pictures. You can see, like, the shelf still looks kind of crappy. But people were like, oh my God, we have dinosaur books now? And I was like, okay, well, I think that tells me something. And what I was testing is I was testing whether or not kids, A, came to the sign, where the sign was, do they read the word, and do they identify with the pictograph? Because one of the things I was considering doing is genrefying for both my K through 2 population and my 3 through 5 population. So I needed to know if words mattered and if signage pictograph mattered for both of my populations to be able to find the books. And one of the things I realized in that very first test that I did is I used the phrase marine life, and no one knew what that meant. And I thought, well, maybe I'll try sea life, but if I put a picture of a shark, they assume that that was the shark section and not whales, sharks, octopus, all of that. So you really have to do some due diligence before you just label some books, was what I learned from some of those earlier tests by doing my own signage.
Well, and again, this is where your signs can evolve and grow. And I'll be honest, when I did my signs for elementary, I also included the Dewey because I was teaching it. And so when I taught Dewey, I taught the sign as well. So I would actually put because I generated my own signs, I put the pictograph, I put the words, I put the number. And so then the kids kind of looked around and they could see exactly what I was talking about. And it made it very concrete for them. So if you make your own signs or you take a picture of the sign and then embed it in whatever lesson you're teaching to your students, all of a sudden, for me, I found that signs were absolutely essential, and having vibrant, colorful pictures for our pre-readers to get a sense of what this collection involved. I did so with things like my gems or my cookbooks for race cars, and it was, I had a sign for the Titanic, and for me, genrefying the Titanic section was really important because anybody who has Titanic books knows it's scattered to the wind. Like you have Titanic everywhere in your collection in all these different places. And so I found that you absolutely wanted to include a bright, vibrant picture as well. On the elementary level, you're going to encounter pre-readers and readers, and you have all of these titles in a single collection. I know listeners would love to know, what solutions have you devised to appeal to all of your elementary readers?
So one of the things, like I said, that I decided to do is I have genrefied all of the collection together. I have nonfiction, fiction, easy books, biographies, all together when it's appropriate, which is most of the time. So I'll give you an example. So sports is one of the first things that I decided to genrefy to see if that worked. Because besides my VPK and kindergartners, 1st through 5th grade can wander the library, check out any book. And so I want all of those students to have access across the board in the library. Fiction. I don't want to have separate nonfiction for 1st graders or all of that. Everyone should be able to go anywhere. So if you have a student who comes in and says, I'm interested in basketball. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see. They've come and they're during their recess and they have a few minutes to check out a book. So you're like, well, basketball. Okay. So you would like to learn how to play basketball. Let me walk you over here to nonfiction, and I've got some basketball books. And the kid says, well, I like LeBron James. Well, you know what? Now I'm going to walk you over to biography, where I've got a biography book on LeBron James. Well, my teacher wants me to get a chapter book. Okay, well, listen, on the other side of the library, I've got my fiction, and I'm going to introduce you to the crossover. Okay, so now we're going to go over there, and then his little brother is going to come in and say, well, I like basketball too. Okay, well, recess is over, and so is his checkout time. By the time you've done all that, that student does not remember where any of those books are. And he's lost interest, and you've bothered him by pushing all of those books. It's like when you go to a department store and somebody says, how can I help you? What do you want? Do you want that shirt? Can I help you? Is that a small? Is that the right color? Students, you need to teach them to self-browse.
So am I correct then that your collection, the basketball section, would contain your fiction, your nonfiction, your picture books? And
yes, it does.
Okay, so this is because I was like going through my head. I was like, wait, there's like Dino basketball, and I can think of like my basketball books would also then include my picture books and my early readers, what some people call their fast fiction. They're fast fiction books. So your collection would include, so the kids who want basketball are going to see everything you have on basketball, one-stop shop, in a section that would include both fiction, nonfiction, early readers, picture books, chapter books. Wow.
Yeah, so it includes, like there is a Tony Dungy I can recall off the top of my head. Like, you can do it. So picture books about sports are in there. All of my sport biographies are in there. All of my team sports, learn about the Minnesota Vikings. All of my Capstone books on like the 10 best players, the 10 best nicknames. All of those books are in sports. And then all of my sport fiction books are in sports. Because that's how they develop an interest in reading across the board, is that they're going to read about LeBron James and then they're going to pick up the crossover, or they're going to pick up Booked.
Wow. And and if you know anything about elementary kids, boy, they do those, they get into those, they really sort of sink their teeth into topics, and it could last a year. And, that dinosaur phase could go on for quite some time, or our kids who are all invested in the particular corners of the library, but now you've given them everything. It literally is a one-stop shop when it comes to genrefication, because they don't have to navigate to other parts of the library if that's what they happen to be into at that time.
And it also, people are like, well, then it pins them in that, and they won't go anywhere else. Okay, well, what's wrong with that? If I have a student who loves dinosaurs and they're going to age up through dinosaurs for several years, then I got my picture books there on their level. And then I've got my easy reader, my Lego Jurassic Park stories, in which they're probably going to pick up a year too early, by the way. But they're going to pick it up and look at the pictures. And then next year, they're going to pick it up again and be able to read it. And I've got my nonfiction dinosaur books there. But then I've got Dinosaur Bob there. And Dinosaur Bones. All in dinosaurs. And by the way, the kindergartners will stand next to a fifth grader, and they love that they are checking out the same book.
And, they get excited. I mean, I can just, my memory of these kids who start to become so well acquainted with those areas of the library, they want to show their expertise to their friends. And they want to say, I've read that book, I've read that book, I've read that book. I can imagine you also have a unicorn section, a princess section, a train section, automobile section. And it becomes very intuitive for your shoppers, your readers who are going out there, because they feel so empowered.
Right. And they are empowered to then, I don't have to do a lot of teaching where the genres are. They do that amongst the peers. Like, somebody will come up to me and say, listen, where is such and such book? Because one of the bulletin boards I have, you'll know, like those popular book flicks bulletin boards, like Netflix. I have one of those, and they'll point to a book. They think that's the catalog now. It is a little, I have to fix that. But they'll point and they'll say, I would like that book. Where is it? And inevitably, some student will go, oh, I'll show you. I know right where that is.
You mentioned catalog. Somebody out there is saying, this sounds like a great idea. What does your catalog look like?
So how the catalog looks like, and I think depends on your software. We use Destiny and Follett Learning. And how that works for us is our district wants us to keep the spine label the same. So, I mean, I'll admit I tried to have the spine label changed to genrefication, but they're like, if you leave us, we want the spine label to still say that. But they allow you to put the genre label on if you want. And then in Destiny, you are allowed to tie it to your genre sublocation. So any kid who comes in and searches the Destiny catalog, for Amulet or some dinosaur books. So our popular stuff is manga and all of that. It says right on there. So even if I have a book and its labeled genre is fantasy by Follett, but I have it on the shelf in long series because it's Amulet and it's more than 9 books, that's what it's going to say.
Okay.
So it can still have the label with the cute picture, but if you custom set it up that way and you tie it to your local listing, as long, whatever your specific thing is, then the students can still find it.
Well, and forgive me, but as a solo librarian, you don't have to explain yourself to anybody. I mean, I'm asking you to explain yourself right now, but you don't work side by side with another professional. You don't have another person in that space who's going to sit there and go, yeah, but this isn't, you don't have to justify what you're doing. I just know that somebody might ask. And I think the fun thing is when you do have students who become so familiar with your collection because it's so intuitive, it makes so much sense. It is hard for me. I remember having to try and explain to my students why our collection was divided up the way it was. And you're sitting there in the back of your head going, this is dumb. The kid thinks it's dumb. Having to explain why Dewey is arranged the way it is seems ridiculous to me. I have to say, hey, listen, it's a broken system, but we still use it. And you're like, I'm listening to myself going, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. What I've noticed, especially in elementary libraries, I've got 14 years of experience working in them, is oftentimes you have the largest collections, but you have considerably smaller spaces than your middle school counterparts or your high school counterparts. And this has been consistent for me my entire career as a school librarian. What have you done when it comes to genrefying to take into consideration the fact that you are dealing with a space that is considerably smaller than, say, a middle school or a high school physical library?
Well, I soon realized, and some of this is on my blog, and you've done many episodes on weeding and hoarding. So, in fact, I think that's originally one of the first ways we talked was about the hoarding in my library. And you have to choose quality over quantity. And you have to convince your staff that is what is important, is not the number of books. It's the quality of the books. So that is the first thing I did, even before I pondered genrefying, even though I had it in the back of my mind, is that I had to weed, even if people were going to be upset about it. Now there is not a book I would not weed.
Well, and again, non-librarians don't understand. I would rather cut my collection in half if I knew what it would do it would be the half of the, I mean, we have so many books that don't get circulated. We have the stats to prove it. You don't have to explain yourself to me, but again, to non-librarians, the optics are never good when books leave. So if you want to make sure that you don't upset anybody, don't remove books from the shelf until you have those new books to replace them, because everyone gets excited about the new books, and what they fail to notice are the outdated books which haven't seen the light of day. I know when I consolidated my collections, I did a report of books that hadn't circulated in 8 years. If a book hasn't been checked out in 8 years, it doesn't deserve a spot in our shelf. And when I did that, all of a sudden, and this was because we were packing up and getting new carpeting in our space, nobody cared that the books that were removed didn't get put back on the shelf, because when they got put back on the shelf, those books were long gone. I love this question because it specifically addresses the challenge that elementary school libraries have. And that is because many of our books are tall. Many of our books challenge the height of our bookshelves. When you genreify an elementary library, not only is it where you're putting the bookshelves, but how high the shelves have to be in terms of to accommodate taller books. I've worked in elementary libraries where the picture books actually weren't facing upright. They were lying down. They were facing down. And this is frustrating because if you do go to the extent of putting a spine label on your books that are genreified, you're not looking at the spine anymore because the spine is turned down because the books are too tall for the shelf.
Yes. So that is one of the, again, this is all the work when I say don't genreify just to increase circulation. If you want to increase circulation, some of these things you could just do and not genreify. So those are some decisions that you should make ahead of time, just weed, just clean up. And this is one of the things that I did is I took the time to reset all of our shelves. So all these metal shelves that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, our picture books had 3 shelves. And I took the bottom shelf off so that it would only have 2 shelves, but all of those picture books now would sit up the correct way and they would be vertical.
Well, and forgive me, because I'll be honest, 16 years in the library, I've never worked where there were metal shelves.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't. My libraries are older than the 70s. And so there would have been these wooden behemoths. And so when you're moving the bookshelves, you're sort of adjusting from the sides. But if I'm not mistaken, you now have a very varied heights of your books because you are blending your picture books with your nonfiction, with your beginning readers, your fast fiction or your fiction are all. So it's not likely that your books are going to all have a uniform height.
No, not like middle and high school. So one of the things, and I don't know too many people who did this, and when I first did it, my library boss, I think, looked at me sideways and was about to revoke my librarian card. But one of the things I did, and because there are not a lot of books on each of my shelves, and I have some pictures on my blog, which you can see, but Mike Rawls, the book wrangler, also does this. So I'm going to give him a thumbs up. But I organize the books by shelf height because they're genreified and not by the author's last name, but by the tallest book to the shortest book on that shelf. And you know what? Any kid understands that is how it works and is more likely to be able to help you out and put that book correctly where it goes. And again, genreification is trying to create greater access. So they can find the book, they can self-select, and they can be ownership to put the book back where it goes.
I think that's, I'm mind blown right now because I'm looking back on how I've done this for so long. And I realized there's another way to do this. I just needed to have this conversation with you. Many school libraries exclusively organize their collection into baskets like classroom libraries do. And you wrote this in your blog post, quote, "I don't want students to feel like they're just in a larger classroom library." And I just died. This was You're so right. Like, we aren't just a bigger classroom library. We are special in that we aren't a classroom library.
Yes. So I have some baskets. I have some clear boxes that are the pantry boxes because I can't afford the Demco book baskets that are $145. But yes, they are. They're $145, the Mega Brows. Kudos to anyone who has those. I would love to see them. But I just have the pantry boxes, and mine, I think, are a little pricey. They are from the Container Store. They're about $20. Now, I use them more as a marketing and signage tool because they're clear. So I might have one or two in a section so that kids can sort of see, they're unicorns in that box. That's the unicorn section. Or they tidy up, where I have some chapter books and they're easy to get back in. I don't use them exclusively to contain like all of the books everywhere because it's difficult in a basket to see what's in back. So I've never quite understood how that is creating more access. And I've never had an issue in all of my testing with students that they like to pull a book off the shelf, pull it out, look at it, put it back in.
We talked a little bit about being able to see the spine labels. When you label your genrefied collection, do you exclusively use the commercially made spine labels, or have you gone a different route?
Up until this year, I have never used any spine labels.
I love this. I'm so glad that you're here because I know somebody out there would do genrefying if they realized that they could do this without having to change the labels.
Well, I've never quite understood, like once you have physically moved the books and they're on the shelf and you've identified the shelf that they're on with a sign or a picture, the only reason you now need to identify the students can find the books at this point. The only reason on the elementary level to identify the book after that is for the adult to shelve it. It is not for the student.
Yes, I appreciate that putting a sticker of a cat on a book about a cat seems ridiculous.
Yes. So I've always, and I don't want to be critical of anyone that has identified the Diary of the Wimpy Kid with humor stickers.
No, friends, I posted this years ago. I had an assistant who, and like I said, we shared libraries. So this assistant reported to several librarians, and I walked into this situation and I said, "Are you kidding me?" Because there were so many spine labels on the book that you couldn't read the title. Okay.
Correct.
And on Diary of Wimpy Kid, every single one was listed realistic fiction and a humor sticker. And I'm like, wait, you don't need to tell any kid that this is a funny book. Like, this does not make any sense. And especially not you're sacrificing the title to be able to read which book it is. But I agree that it is entirely possible to go way overboard when it comes to labeling books. But you're right. The adults need it because if you rely on the adult to shelve it, then you're going to have to communicate that to the adults that are working in your space, which you don't have. It's just you. And I agree. Setting your space up because somebody is coming after you also doesn't make any sense because how long you're going to be there is indeterminate. But you're right. So forgive me. When you put your books on the shelves, have you ever been in the situation where you were sort of on the fence about something? So if you had a Pinkalicious book, because I know that that's a series that I think is still in the elementary libraries, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Very popular.
Would Pinkalicious be in which category? And explain to me how, so break that down, because I can see that being something that you might be on the fence about.
Well, I mean, is it Pinkalicious Halloween? That might be in holidays, right?
Oh, right. So you have a Halloween. Oh, you have different holiday sections too, right?
Well, I just have holidays.
Okay, so you have holidays. So
just wanted to trick you there.
Okay, so holidays. So Pinkalicious, depending on if it was. So I was like, do you put it under like the unicorns? Do you put it under princess?
Yeah. I do have a section, and this is why I say like genrefication is ongoing. And shouldn't end, because like I do have a princess, dragon, unicorn section.
Is that one section or 3 sections?
Yeah, no, it's one section, because I don't have that many books so far in it. And so I make sure like those books are sort of in there, and they're rotating in and out on like which ones are in sort of that clear book basket, and then which ones are sitting on the shelf next to it. And that's how like I keep an eye out on how the genrefication process is working and what in the basket, which is more effective than what's on the shelf and what's in that. And then what, in your question, like things that can fall into several different categories. And I think that happens more with chapter books, like is something fantasy or is something science fiction. And I think people get a little bit too caught up in that. And if the book is being checked out and the students like it and they're reading it where you've put it, fantastic. So, like, there's a series in elementary called Claude. It's very popular. I have it in science fiction, but I do have a section, I have a genre that's animal stories. Okay, well, he is an animal, but I have it in science fiction, and there seems to be no problem with that.
There you go. Again, it boils down to how well do you know your readers.
Right. So I think that you should not get caught up on like where the book will fall. If you are doing the genrefying, and then we can talk about this on whether or not you are going to do it yourself or if you are going to get the help from somebody else.
And what do you mean by like somebody else? Like you
from the help,
the professionals. Who are you calling upon to help you in this process?
Right. So now that it has become so popular, every book vendor has now jumped on board, and they have created whole departments for genrefication, right? And there are some good consults that they'll do with you to help you genrefy if you're like, listen, this is beyond me and I would just like someone to do it and send me the bill. So I think every company does it. I think Mackin does it and some others, and Follett Learning does it. And even if you don't have, I have in the show notes, even if you don't have Follett Learning and you are not a Destiny customer, they have a whole guide and best practices, which you can take advantage of and read their guide and see what the process is and kind of use it as a checklist in your own library. But one of the things they'll do with you is they will help you run a tidal wave analysis on where your collection is and say, listen, after doing this, you need to weed, and this is where we think your genres fall based on your collection. And they have 2 options for you. They have what's called an express genre program in which you just check a box and they set up your genres based on the suggested really tags that are most common. Realistic fiction, friendship, mystery, all of that. And they'll take care of it. They ship you your books. They have nice labels. And you get them and you're like, fantastic. And now you're going. And then they'll send you those stickers for all of those categories so you can label your collection that's already on the shelf.
Got it. And I worked with, I was very lucky. I worked with an assistant who made some of our own stickers. And it was, again, it's really what works for you and the space that you're in. And more importantly, what kind of money you have. Because I know for me, I didn't have any money to buy stickers, but my predecessor had some sort of color dots that they had used at one point and currently weren't using. And so I did a big dig into our workroom and I found a label system that I could use without really having to buy anything in addition. And so I will just say, as somebody who's worked with oftentimes no budget at all, really working with what you've got, what you can create using, a sheet of blank Avery labels is just as good, especially if you don't have money to work with. I am curious because I'm not the only one who's assumed that genrefying would be like this magic fix that would revolutionize how students engaged with the collection that we have. But there are certain things that genrefication can't fix, and I'm hoping you will share.
Sure. So I think we need to know that genrefication isn't a fix for student engagement. Like, if I genrefy, then everyone's going to come to my library and they're going to be so engaged because I've now labeled the books and they can find them. You still need to be the person driving the train. You need to know that it's not a passive activity. The labels are passive, but you still need to be actively doing the process of genrefication all the time. So I think that that's what some people think, that it's a magic fix, and once they do it, their magic will happen and then they can leave it alone.
Well, and I think we can't sort of expect that we can sit back and let the circulations just happen without a certain amount of active pushing of those titles, and I'm thinking about book talks and book tastings. Those still are important. The fact that you have reorganized your collection in a way that's more intuitive and facilitates student access doesn't mean that the students that are going to gravitate to the books. You still have to be very actively trying to encourage those readers with book, first chapter Fridays, and making sure that your students have a lot of opportunities to get their hands on the books to see if they're interested in them.
Definitely. That's why I think people, when they are either nervous to genrefy or they're like, I don't have the time, or, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, because they think it's just a one-time project and then they can move on. Or they're like, I'm going to do this. This is going to be part of my evaluation this year. And then what? Fantastic. Next time I'm doing this. But it really has to be an ongoing part of your programming.
Well, and I agree, because once you've genrefied, there is that sort of maintenance component to it. In reassessing, you mentioned that your princess, your dragons, and your unicorns were in one section. It's entirely possible in the next couple of years, those will become their own sections, depending on the demand of those different readers.
Absolutely. So I can tell you, for instance, you talked early on in our conversation about Titanic as like something you pulled out, right? That was either a topic or something you put in a basket or something. So that is definitely a child favorite that kids get obsessed with in elementary school, is the Titanic. And I'm still trying to determine exactly when and how that occurs.
Oh,
because
well, this speaks to when I started as a librarian, because when I was a librarian, I started in 2007. I was a librarian. I got my library degree and I started my first year. And I know this because I started as a librarian the first year that Diary of a Wimpy Kid came out. And so my career as a librarian is the same age as Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And when that is what really threw me for a loop when I was a brand new librarian. Somebody said I wanted a book on the Titanic. And so I did a simple search in my Follett, and it came up, and I'll never forget, I had 42 titles. And it only created more questions for me with the student, because I'm like, well, what kind of book do you want about the Titanic? Do you want a fact book? Do you want a storybook? And it was scattered. Like, and the student was like, why are all these books? They're not all in one spot. And I didn't have a good answer. And I think it also has to do with the fact that there are movies about the Titanic. And in 2007, there was a great deal. People were still watching the Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, and I think that I was like, why do I have 42 books on the Titanic? And they're not together. So yes, genrefication was my realization. That was when I realized I really had a lot to learn about how libraries are organized, but more importantly, how they could be organized to avoid that kind of problem in the first place. Given all of your experience genrifying elementary collections, you've talked about some of the pitfalls but what would you advise listeners who are tuning into this conversation right now? You've given us so many great ideas, but if you could just let us know, what are some things that you want to make sure that are big takeaways for people who are tuning in right now?
Well, I think you don't want to underestimate the time involved. That is one of the things I did originally. That's probably why I have several blog posts. Because it takes a lot of time and the labor involved. And that it's definitely ongoing. So those are two of the things that you should know up front. And I think, as we've talked about, that you should not assume that it's just about the labeling, especially in elementary school. That really might work for middle or high school, where you can sort of just label the books and a student knows that it's dystopian fiction and all of that. And we haven't really talked about so much the kinds of labels that are on books are much more geared towards middle and high school, because they have words on them. A lot of 7-year-olds don't know what realistic fiction is, or supernatural or paranormal. So that is one of the things that you really need to think about in advance before you get into it. And getting support from your admin, from your principal and staff. So when I first started, I did do a lot of experiments that I didn't tell my principal in the beginning that I was doing. But when I said, I used that as evidence when I went back in and said, I have done, these are my statistics. As a result of my experiments, I really should have had a little sign, I said, on my library, that you are entering a randomized study. But you need the support of your staff in order to get the buy-in. And I think after I presented her with those statistics, that she was really on board with it. And if you're going to go through all that labor and that time, you need that support.
So our administrators are are keenly tuned into decisions that are data driven. And if you can establish a need for something because you have gathered, you've taken that time, that extra step to collect data that supports the decision to genreify, then the hope is that they're going to connect with this and say, you're absolutely right. This is the best thing we can do and the best use of your time. Shelley, I'm so grateful you joined us today, and thank you in advance for all these amazing show notes that you have put together for us. Would you let us know how we can find you on social media? I know people are going to love to connect with you. You and I cross paths on Twitter all the time.
Well, that is where you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at Library of Quirky. And there is a link in the show note to my blog. I'm somewhat active on my blog. If I feel it's important, then I'll post on there. And that's how you can find me.
Fantastic. Shelley, I wish you a very happy 2023. And I look forward to meeting you in Tampa in October.
Fantastic. I hope everyone comes to the conference in October.
I thank you so much and have a great year. Friends, I always feel incredibly selfish asking my guests to stop everything and to record episodes with me. And in this case, if you could think back to what you were doing in the days between Christmas and New Year's. And friends, that is exactly what Shelley Kappeler did. She had all of her show notes. She had all of her ideas put together, and we sat down and recorded an episode. And it was really very wonderful because it was sort of a moment in which we could sort of stop and reflect on our profession and talk about the things that we love and do so amidst all of the holiday chaos. So I'm very grateful to Shelley for doing that. Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider sharing some fan mail with Shelley or leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. One last friendly reminder, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be STEM Librarian and my conversation with Amanda Chacon. I hope you will tune in.